Okay, hello. My name's Stuck. We're going to be doing a fundamentals of the Alt V multiplayer client, which is for Grand Theft Auto 5. These fundamentals are kind of meant to teach new developers that are coming to Alt V some of the basics that come with Alt V. We're going to be mainly focusing on TypeScript. If you don't know programming, this is not the tutorial for you. Do not look at this tutorial. Uh, this tutorial is literally meant for people who are familiar with programming, but they just want to know some of the fundamentals and the language that revolves around Alt V and how to do some of the very basic things that come with Alt V itself. That being said, we're going to go ahead and move into what is going to be uh, done inside of this video. This is going to be kind of in a more of a stream format. This is usually how I talk to my viewers on Twitch and things like that whenever I do stream. But that being said, I'm going to quickly download a package real quick. I'm not actually going to show this. It's my Alt V TypeScript package. You can get it on GitHub. So github.com/stuck. And you'll find Alt V TypeScript. And that is what we'll be using as the base for our repository here. So I'm going to go ahead and clone that real quick. I'm going to open it up. We're going to go ahead and focus into that so that you guys can see what I'm talking about. So let's go ahead and set up VS Code. Let's set this to TypeScript. And here we are. And let me go ahead and actually fix this so that we see the full screen here. Let's just go boom, boom. Yeah, we still need the chroma key there. Got to make it look fancy. And let's just go ahead and we'll go with this format. All right. So that being said, we'll be using Alt V. It's a little bit different than 5M and RageMP. Well, actually, it's a lot of bit different. It's almost an entirely different language. But that being said, let's dig into what this actually means for you as a person that wants to build a server on Alt V. I'm going to go ahead and remove these. There we go. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is open a console. And what you need to know is that we have to install a bunch of binaries to run a server. And what that means is, well, you have to download a bunch of binaries. Normally you can get them from the Alt V website. They have a server download package thing that you can go through. But with this package specifically that I have, we are using a script, which is the Alt V package script. So what this does is if I do npm I, going to install everything for me as long as I have node 17 plus installed. So make sure you have that before you do anything else. But I've opened a console, I've typed npm I, it's installing everything based on node. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a script. This is a script. It runs various different npm related functionalities or package related functionalities. What I need is to update and get the latest release. So I'm going to do npm run update. Boom. It's downloading. And once this is done, we're going to give it a moment. Sometimes it takes a little longer than normal. All right, there we go. So everything is now installed. All of our packages, we also updated these as well. Make sure these are always up to date. You can get them on npm. Check your versions, cross-reference them, and so on and so forth. That being said, let's dive into what it's like to actually build things with the Alt V stuff. So here we have like a boilerplate. This is the first thing that's loading. In order for this to load, we have a resource configuration file here. And the main file that it's targeting is server startup.javascript. You also have a similar thing for the client. You have client main, which is the main file it should load, like your resource should load when it's being loaded. And inside of server CFG, we have our main resource, which is called core. So what is being done here is that when we actually go and run this server, it's going to be looking for the compiled version of core inside of a folder called resources. With TypeScript specifically, though, we have to compile this or transpile it. So if I do npm run build, it's going to go ahead and build everything for me real quickly. And inside of resources, we will see we have the core folder here. We have client and server. And then we have the same thing. It's looking for files and files to basically load in. So here we have the folder called server, which is this one here. And we have the file called startup.js. And that is the first file that it is going to load. So that is your main entry point to make a resource load. We're not going to cover multi-resource because multi-resource is inherently bad with Alt-V. It's too complicated for the average user, and in most cases, it's kind of inefficient because of the way that we need to pull and cache data. We won't dig too much into that. So we're going to stay with a single resource, which is going to be called core, and we're going to do all of our changes outside of the scope of this folder. Because this is TypeScript. We don't want to do any of our changes inside of resources unless it's pure JavaScript. If you're working in pure JavaScript, that's totally fine. But for me specifically, we're using TypeScript. So we need to do it outside of the resources folder to change the main TypeScript files and then transpile them so that the changes are reflected in the actual like compiled code. That being said, one of the first things that we're going to do with this boilerplate is you already notice we have some basic things that are inside of here. So let me explain what is happening. So we have an import called alt. This is from the alt server, okay? So this is on the server side. So there's two different sides. There's a client side and a server side. Alt server is like for handling things like when to spawn the player, what to do with them when they connect to the server, to look up things in the database, that kind of stuff. Well, the client side is more of like, I want to show or manipulate the player's camera. I want to show them like web views. I want to show them this and that and so on and so forth. So we do have ways to communicate from the server to the client, which is already built in the Alt-V, which makes it very simple. But there's also, the biggest thing to understand is that you need to understand that these two like sides are very, very different, okay? Server side can only do very specific things, and client side can only do very specific things as well. And usually on client side, you'll see something like import all as native from natives. And this is how you know it's client side. If you're trying to do natives, then that means it's completely client side. It cannot be done on server side at all. But that being said, let's go back to what's inside of here. So inside of the server startup.TypeScript file, we have a log that's saying, hey, the boilerplate started. We have what is called an event. So when on player connect, read it like a sentence. On player connect, I want to call this function, which is taking in a player. And we want to say, hey, this player has connected to the server. We want to set their model. We want to spawn them. And then we want to emit something to the client, letting them know that we got something. So what does that look like in practice? So if we actually start the server, and with this package specifically, this is how we start the server. This is my package, but we do npm run windows or npm run dev, windev. And this will start the server for us. If you're doing your own thing and you have your own stuff that you want to set up with your own binaries, you usually run the executable. If you're on Linux, you run the binary itself. But here with the Alt-V TypeScript package, I just do npm run dev. This is going to start it up for me. And I'm going to go ahead and boot up Alt-V, actually, since I forgot to get that running in the background while this was all happening. So I'm going to pause real quick, and then I'll resume right when the client itself is loaded. Okay, so it looks like we have actually made it into the server, so I'm going to go ahead and show you that. So if I hit connect, and I just go connect, here we are. I'm in the server. I have spawned, and in my console, I actually got boilerplate started, and that's from the server side. So we have spawned, and if we look at our console here, we'll see something like, oh, Stuck is connected to the server or whatever, which you can see down. Now, let's go over what you can do and how to explain some of these concepts to you. That comes specifically with Alt-V. So, for example, let's say that when a player connects to the server, we want to emit something to them. So here we have an example emit, but let's actually walk you through what it's like to emit from the server to the client and the client to the server, okay? So we're going to do alt emit client, all right? And and we're going to pass the player. And we're going to give it an event name. This is a string representation of the event on client side. So let's say it's do something. Or actually, let's do camel or kebab case here. Do something, right? And we want to do, we want to pass some arguments to it. Here we have an array of arguments that we can pass to it. We can do hello. Yeah, let's just say hello. Okay. So we're going to take this event and we're going to go over to the client side. And over here, we have an on server event. So we're going to actually do the same thing that's up here. Alt on server, do something. And then we're going to do handle do something. And we're going to make a function that is handled here. Handle do something, message, anything. Or string, sorry. So this message that we're getting from the server, we want to do something with it. So let's say that we want to append to it. So we're going to do message plus equals world. Add a space in there. And then we're going to take this message and relay it back to the server. So on the client side, we need to do an emit server. Alt emit server. And we're going to do something. And then we're going to pass that message back up. Okay. And then back on the server side, up here, we need to handle a client event. So we're going to do alt on client, do something, and then we're going to handle the do something function, right? And we're going to do function, do something. Player is always going to be the first argument, and then we're going to get the message back, and then we're going to console log it. Hello, we got message from the client. Okay, so if I go back in game here, and I reconnect, boom, there we go, I'm in game. And then you'll see, hello, we got hello world from the client. Right, so that means that we've just made a round trip from the server to the client doing events. Now this is very standard practice. We actually do this everywhere with events. So when I need something to happen when a player joins the server, this is usually how I have to do it. So that means that, like, let's say that, for example, we get rid of this do something thing, and then we want them to explode when they join the server. And we only want this player to explode. Okay, so we're gonna just go over to here, and we're gonna type in explode. And we don't need to pass the player because we actually already have the player. You have to think this code right here is running on the client's computer. So we already have this code natively running there. That's why we have access to natives. So what that means is that we can make their game do something specific because we told it to. That being said, we could do something like native, I don't know, let's look around. Explode, or maybe there's like a create explosion or something. Oh geez, I can't remember what it's called. Add explosion. And then we can do alt player local position X, alt player local position Y, alt player local position Z. And we can set like an explosion type. I'm going to actually click on this link here and open it up because I don't know the explosion types. It looks like it's an enum. Let's just give it like 5. I don't know what that's going to be, but we'll just give it that. And then we're going to add in the rest of the arguments. I don't know, let's make the damage scale 5, true, false. Let's make the camera shaking like just insane and no damage to false. All right, so when I join the server, it should actually explode me. So I'm going to go to my client. I'm going to hit reconnect. And if you didn't hear it, there was an explosion. But that being said, we need to kind of delay it a little bit because the player spawn can sometimes take a little bit of time, it seems like. So let's go ahead and actually just do alt.nextTick. And instead of doing a, actually we can do alt utils wait, and we can make it wait for like 1 second. And if we make this function async, we can await for this to finish as well. So that'll wait 1 second before exploding, and that'll make sure that we're spawned and in that position, and then it'll go ahead and do that for us, hopefully. Let's try this again. Oh yeah, perfect. That's exactly what we wanted. So as you can see, I have died there. So that's usually how you kind of do things from server to client. But things get a little more complex as we introduce, different things. So let's say, for example, maybe we need something to we need like kind of information about the player's position. So let's write something that'll do that. So let's get the player's current position when we press like the F1 key. So we could do a key down event on the client side, which means that when a key is pressed, or pressed down, or pressed up, or whatever, I actually like to do key up because that's when they let go of the key. We can look for that key information, and then we could do something with it. So in this instance, I'm going to be registering a key to F1. So if key equals 112, so these are JavaScript key codes is what you're looking for. If you're looking for something to Google here, it's a JavaScript key code. So on key up, what I want this to do is print user information. We're going to write a function to do that. So print user information. We're going to call that function when the key is pressed. And inside this function, we're going to log a few things to the console. So for example, we're going to log the player's position. We're going to do POS, we'll do JSON, stringify, alt player local position. And let's actually get a few more things in here. So we got position, let's do rotation. Let's do maybe their ID as well, because that could be useful. Alt log ID. You just do alt player local ID. And there we go. All right, so we have print user information when I press the F1 key. So if I go in game, reconnect, and if I press F1 here, in my console, I now have ID position rotation, which is exactly what I need. Now, let's actually get rid of some of the stuff that we did earlier. So let's get rid of do something. That's just killing me now. And we'll unregister this event up here. We'll keep natives up here because we'll probably end up using it later. Let's get rid of this client here. We also don't need this. So let's just kind of clean up here. Get rid of some things that we don't need, kind of like that. And then, I don't know, we don't need this, and this, and there we go. Okay, and now here's another thing. Let's actually talk about how to structure this stuff, because when you're building a server, there's a lot of things that you need to add into it. So if I actually go in here and let's say that I want to have more files than just these startup files. We're not in the old ages of SAMP where we're doing everything in a single file. That's really fucking dumb. Please don't do it. And pardon my language on that, but please don't do it. It's not worth it. Please organize your code. We have ways to do this. It's much better. All right, so let's talk about how to do it, okay? So we want to take this startup file and we want to take this connection code and we want to do something else with it. We want to move it into its own file. So let's make a folder. Let's call it events. And let's call the first event, let's name it the same as the event. Let's call it like playerconnect.ts, okay? And inside of here, we're going to take all this code. We're going to put it right in here. Boom. All right. Now, in startup, we're not loading anything. This file is not loaded until we load it in startup. And let me show you how to do that. We just do import ./events player connect. Okay, now it's loaded. That's it. That's all you have to do to import stuff. Think of your startup as like a way to load everything in order. You want your startup file to basically warm up your game mode in a specific order, if that makes any sense. So the first thing that we're doing is startup starts, and then it goes in, it loads this file. It goes through this code base, and it goes, I'm going to import this. I'm going to register this event, and I'm going to bind it to this function. And that's all that's happening inside of the entire code base, okay? So it's like doing it in like reading order, if that makes sense. Like this is your first page, and then it's like, hey, this is your second page. I'm going to go into this second page, and I'm going to load everything in here. And then from there, we're going to do some things, okay? So that being said, now we have a way to get the player's position when we press F1. We are spawning the player. We have them set to a model, so on and so forth. So let's talk about some more complicated things, because this is what we need to go over. So let's talk about something like a hull shape. Now, a cull shape, the best way that I can explain it, it's an invisible object, okay? And when a player walks into that invisible object, it triggers something. Very simple, right? So let's go ahead and talk about how or what we can actually do with something like that. All right. So we're going to create a new folder and let's just call it let's call it systems. And we're going to make a new file and we're going to call it weapon giver. Okay. And we're going to go ahead and import some stuff in the top. Import all as alt from alt server. There we go. And what we want to do is we need to register this new file in systems. So we're going to separate this. We're going to do events. Down here, we're going to do systems. And then we're going to do import systems weapon giver. Okay. Now inside of weapon giver, we're going to need to build like a cull shape to register, right? We want one cull shape in the whole server that's just going to give one specific weapon. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in game here and I'm going to walk over here and I'm going to press F1. I have a position now. I'm going to copy it from my console. We're going to do position. And there we go. There's my position, right? So now what I can do is I can register a cull shape based on this. Now there's several different types of cull shapes, but we're going to just use the cylinder because I think the cylinder is the easiest and most simple cull shape that will ever exist. So let's do my cull, or let's do this. Let's call it weapon cull shape. Okay, we're going to do new alt dot. Let's do cull shape cylinder. Now, what's really important here is that this Z position is in the middle of your player's body. Okay, so that's literally in the middle of your player's body. So where it's going to be spawning is going to be too high for it to be triggered. So we actually need to subtract 1 from that Z position. Okay? Get that in your head because you need to remember that. Always subtract 1 when you're getting the player's position. Okay? Now, cull shape cylinder. We're going to pass some information into it. So we need X, Y, Z, radius, height, etc. So let's do X, Y, Z. Radius, let's give it 5. Or I'm sorry, we need to actually do position X, position Y, position Z. We'll give it a radius of 5. Or actually, we'll do 3. That's much smaller. Give it a height of like 3. The player's height is actually 1, but 3 should be more than enough. And there we go. So we have a cull shape. Now, the thing about this is it's invisible. You're not going to see it at all. So if we look over here, there is nothing going on over here. You have nothing to see. Now, we need to take this information that we have here, and we need to register and write events based around it. So let's do alt on cull shape or entity enter cull shape. Okay. And let's make it so that when the player, it's only a player only one. So we can set weapon cull shape players only. We can set that to true up here, right? Now, when the player enters the cull shape, we want to handle that. So handle enter cull shape. Okay. So we can do function handle enter cull shape, and then this is going to give us some information about how we should usually like handle the event types that come with it. Like different events have different parameters. So let's look at this listener here. It says cull shape, alt cull shape, entity, alt entity. So what I like to do is I will copy this, paste it like that, open this function up, and then now we have a what we call a fat arrow function. Personally, I don't like them. So I usually take from this page, I usually cut it again, and I do handle enter cull shape. I just paste it and remove the arrow, and now I have a normal function. And then I can just do handle enter cull shape. And to me, this looks a little bit better as far as like registering events and so on and so forth. So the opposite of an entering a cull shape is basically leaving it. So we can also register that event as well. Entity, I always forget. It's like entity leave cull shape or something. Entity leave cull shape. And then we can do handle leave cull shape. And we can copy this, paste it down here, handle leave cull shape. Perfect. Now we can say player has entered, and then we can do player has left. Perfect. All right, so now, excuse me, we should have a way to get a message when they enter and leave a call shape based on whatever's happening. So if I enter this call shape, and then I check my console, it says player has entered. And if I leave, we also have player has left, which is, it's down there. So now we have the basics of call shapes, okay? So the basics of call shapes are these events are triggered by any call shape, okay? So any call shape that is ever created is going to be coming through here. If we only want a specific call shape to ever be handled inside of this specific event, then we need to give some identifiers to this weapon call shape, okay? Now what I like to do is I usually add my own custom property to it. Now with TypeScript, let's say custom prop equals test or whatever, this isn't allowed, right? This is a problem. There's two workarounds. One of them is the more complex one, which is extending the call shape, the class. So if you're familiar with extend XYZ or whatever, and then doing super props and things like that, definitely go down that route. But if you're lazy and you don't really care and you just want to use the existing types, what I like to do is add my own stuff to it. So I will say, or I will put a identifier property. So this is basically the equivalent of doing this, but this just makes it so that TypeScript doesn't complain. And then I can do weapon call shape, right? Now, at the top, let's actually just do identifier equals weapon call shape. And identifier. There we go. All right, so now we have this identifier to work with. And so, like, if the player, or if call shape identifier is not equal to identifier, we're going to return. That means that we will never get this event again. Or we will never trigger this event if the identifier does not match. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense, because that means that this specific call shape has this identifier, and if any other call shape comes through here and it does not match the identifier, which is defined here, it will not trigger anything past this point here. Okay, so that means that we have now filtered out what we want when this or what we want to do when a player enters this call shape. So now we can say player is getting a weapon, or player has left the weapon getter call shape. Okay, and to really drive this point forward more, we're going to actually clone this file, and then I'll show you one that'll give you like a different weapon or something. But let's go ahead and just give the player a weapon. So we're going to do, we can actually change this to player, and set this to player, set this to player, because we have it set to is player or players only. So that means that it has to be a player when we get it in here. So now we can do player. Let's say give weapon, and we need to do a weapon hash. So there's this little list down here that I'm going to click on. And let's just say we're going to give, oh no, that's the MO type actually. So Alt-V usually has like documentation for weapons. I'm just gonna go look that up. And models. And let's just say this is going to give a pistol 50. So instead of doing it based on these weird hash numbers, we can do it based on, oh no, it looks like we only got it based on hash numbers. Oh no, wait, no we don't. No we don't. So let's do a AP pistol. And we'll, here at the top, I'm gonna do weapon to give, alts.hash, let's call it weapon hash actually. All right, we're gonna do weapon hash. We're gonna give it as much ammo as we can, and equip now is true. All right, so now when I enter this, I should be getting a weapon. So let's go ahead and try that out. If I walk into this cull shape, there we go, I've got my pistol. Simple enough, right? All right, so now let's talk about how or why we did all this, right? So as I explained, we need an identifier for the cull shape. So let's say if I copy this and I paste that, right? And I'm going to rename it to weapon giver again. And I'm going to go ahead and import systems weapon giver again. And then inside of again, we want this one to give a different weapon, right? We want it to give a weapon navy revolver or something. Okay? And it's based in the same position, but let's actually just go get a new position for it so that I can show you when I walk in different directions that I get different things based on that. So let's say over here by this red thing, we get a position. So F1, copy this, go over here, paste this down here, boom, there we go. All right, so now we have two different cull shapes, okay? Now instead of getting all the events when I go through a cull shape, it only does it based on which one I enter. So if I go over here, I still get the AP pistol, right? Oh, wait, that's the Navy revolver. Did I mess up? Hold on. What did I do? 7. Maybe I didn't save it. This needs to be 196. Oh, that's right. Okay, so we have an identifier, which is a matching identifier. So both of these are using the same identifier, right? So let's make this one AP pistol. And then over here, we're going to make it Navy revolver. Perfect. All right, now we can actually see the difference. So there's a difference in these two cull shapes now. So if I go and walk through this one, I should just get the AP pistol, which is what I do. If I check here, I only have that up there. And if I walk over here, I get a revolver. And as you can see, I have both of them now. But they were given to me at separate times. That being said, so now we fully understand how cull shapes work and why we need to add identifiers to cull shapes that do very specific things. Give me one moment. Okay, yeah, so cull shapes are fully explained. We've explained how identifiers work. We explained how to give things when you enter a cull shape. Now let's talk about maybe we want some representations of kind of where these positions are. This is what we need to do. What we need to actually do is make a few things for this. We're going to actually remove the second file because we don't need it, and remove the weapon giver again. Save that. All right. So let's talk about structuring this better, right? So we have, we're doing a lot of stuff in the beginning of the file. We're registering some events and so on and so forth. So what I like to do is set up a function for all, or basically like a const for all of this based on what I need. So let's just call this weapon giver. Okay. And we're going to add some things to this to make it do a bunch of different things. So let's do something like, let's do an array. Let's make this really simple. Let's do identifiers, and let's give it a type of array, and we'll give it a weapon, which is going to be a string, and then we're going to give it identifier, which is also going to be a string, and then we'll give it like a position as well, because, why not? We're going to actually do alt vector 3, but we want the I vector 3 version of it. And boom, there we go. All right. So weapon giver, this const here, we're going to register a bunch of different functions inside of it that are going to help organize everything. So instead of weapon giver, I'm going to do one thing, which is, or I'm going to add a function, which is going to be init. And inside of initialization, this is going to register some stuff for us to begin with. Let's see. Well, actually, we don't really need an initialization function. Maybe what we can do here is basically say weapon giver file was registered. Let's just get some debug information in there. And instead of startup, we're going to go ahead and call that. So if I actually do, here at the top, maybe I can do import all as weapon giver from systems weapon giver. And we need to export weapon giver. So we're just going to do export weapon or export default weapon giver. Okay. So now this is like a default thing going on here. So now we can just do weapon giver init. All right, so that's going to initialize it when it loads. We should actually see it down there here in a moment. But we're going to go ahead and abstract all these files, and we're going to get into things like blips, markers, and maybe some vehicles here, okay? But we're going to make a generalized function here that's going to do something very specific for us. So let's go ahead and do add, and we're going to give it a weapon, or we're going to do position, which is going to be alt I vector 3. We're going to give it a identifier, which is going to be a string. Then we're going to give it a weapon hash, which is going to be a number. Okay, and let's actually make this number up here to make it a little easier on us. All right, so when we want to add it, we're going to take the same stuff that we did here and just make a whole system for this to make it super, super easy. Okay. So if we do, what we're going to do is we're going to do identifiers, add, or push. Then we're going to push a new position into it. So we're going to pass position, we're going to pass identifier, and then we're going to pass weapon. Right? Or weapon, which is going to be weapon hash. For consistency's sake, let's just make these variables the same. And there we go. All right, so what's happening here is we're taking the data that's passed through here, we're constructing it into an object, and then the object is pushing it into the array, which is called identifiers. And then inside of the array, we can use that as reference later. Now, that being said, what we need now is to create a cull shape with an identifier on it. So we're going to take this and we're going to create a new cull shape every single time that we add something to our identifiers here, right? So we're going to push the data in and we're going to create a new cull shape. And then inside of here, we're going to add an identifier to it. Let's call it identifier, and then we're going to pass the identifier variable to the identifier property, and then it's been made. Okay, and then we're going to actually set this to player only as well. Weapon cull shape only true. Cool. All right. So let's go ahead and remove some of this stuff. And then we have our generalized functions for handling cull shapes. So what we can do here is we can go ahead and move these functions. Or actually, these functions don't need to be exposed to anybody. So we're actually going to take these and put them at the top. Them right up here above weapon giver, because they're going to be generalized functions, if that makes sense. And what we want to do is if type of cull shape identifier is undefined, we're going to just return, because that means that this cull shape that we got does not have an identifier on it at all. There is no identifier, and we're going to do that for both of them. Okay? And then the identifier up here, we actually need to delete this because this is no longer valid for us. We're just going to remove it. And then it's going to start complaining because, it doesn't know where to find this identifier anymore. So what we're going to do is look up the index and see if it exists. So if I do index identifiers, find index, and we're going to do, so we're going to be looking into the object. So X is going to represent kind of like an iterator of that object. So I can do x.weaponHash now, or x.identifier, x.position. So I'm going to open this up and I'm going to do if x.identifier equals full shape identifier. We return true. Otherwise, we return false. And if the index is less than or equal to -1, then this is not the call shape we're looking for. The identifier we're looking for. That means that this call shape had an identifier, but it's not registered inside of our identifiers for this weapon giver. So we're not interested in it. But if we do find it, then that's perfect. We found it, and now we can actually use that information for our code here. So what we can do is we can do call shape info, or actually let's do weapon give info, and we'll do identifiers and then index. Okay. Now this weapon give info, we can go into here and go boom, weapon give info, and then we can do dot weapon hash, and now we have a way to register that. So there we go. All right. And then down here, we actually can do something similar. So we could take this information and instead of writing this code twice, which is generally a bad idea, what we can do is write a quick little function, which will be called get weapon info, and then we could pass a call shape. And it's either going to return this up here. So we'll call this type weapon info. Actually make it nice and pretty like that. And then we can actually replace that here. And so it's either going to return weapon info or it's going to return undefined. Let's see. Why is this complaining? It should be like that, and then you're supposed to be able to just pass that info. Oh, that's because I have that up there. My bad. All right, yeah. So get weapon info up here. Oh, this is actually supposed to go up here. My bad. Okay, so that goes up there, and it's supposed to either return weapon info or undefined. And we wanted to pass. We basically want to reduce the code complexity that we have by just taking all this information here because it's going to be usable in multiple places. And we do get weapon info. So this is supposed to return undefined because no identifier, it's not there. And then if we go down here, it's going to be undefined because we never found it. And then otherwise what we do is we return identifiers index. Perfect. All right, so now we can do weapon give info, get weapon info, whole shape. If weapon give info is not defined, or rather type of weapon info equals undefined, we return. Isn't that much nicer to look at? Like, look at that. That's so simple. Very small amount of code there. All right, same thing here, but we could just log player left a weapon point or whatever. All right. So now we have enter call shape, we have leave call shape, and we have a way to basically register dynamic weapon giver call shapes and stuff like that. So let me explain how that works now. Because there is a reason why we did this and set up this really complex little function here to do the things that we need to do. So now what I can do is I can do weapon giver add. Let's add that position in here. So I can do POS. I'm gonna actually just cut this out of here like this. Boom. And now I can do weapon AP pistol giver. And then we can do alt hash weapon pistol. All right, so that is now the code that we have to register a new weapon point that will give the player a weapon. Okay, so if I go in here, reconnect, and if I walk over here, I should be given a pistol, which is what happened. Perfect. So, why did we do all this? Why was this useful? So now instead of doing all that stuff and copying the file and having duplicate code, I can walk over here, press F1, grab this position, and we can register a new weapon point. Like this. Boom. Just like that. Subtract 1. Always remember to subtract 1. And let's make it give us an RPG. And let's look up what that looks like. That's just weapon RPG apparently. Okay. And then boom, now we have an RPG giver. Right? And then I can just walk over here and be like, oh, I'm going to get my AP pistol. And then I can walk over here. Oh, hopefully, you know, actually play the game right. Walk over here, and now I've got an RPG. Which is it's very, very simple. Cull shapes are amazing. They can do a lot of really cool stuff. But let's talk about why we did this a bit more. And now what we can do with it. So now that we have a way to add things to this this new class with all these fancy things inside of it, let's add some things to make it even fancier. Like let's make server-wide blips and let's make markers and stuff like that. So let's use all the features of Alt-V to really show you how we can do things. So for example, let's create a blip for it, right? So we can do new alt dot. Let's do blip. Let's do a point blip. We're going to do position X, position Y, position Z, and then we're going to do blip and assign it to this variable here. And now we can set things to it. We can do sprites and stuff like that. So if I go to Google and I type in like Alt-V blip sprites, should return some blip information for me probably. If not, I mean, there's other places you can get that information as well. 5M has great resources too to look at like the images of sprites and things like that. It's all interchangeable. Nothing's different between the different frameworks as far as working with GTA assets. But I'm gonna be looking for an icon like a gun or something so that I can put it in here. So I see one right now. Looks like let's just give it like 156. Or actually, let's make it better. We can do like an icon here. Or sprite, which is going to be like a number. And now these are invalid, so now we can actually assign those. So for the AP pistol, let's give it what looks like a pistol. And for the RPG, let's give it an RPG. And then in blip.sprite, I can assign it the sprite now. And then I can do blip.name. Let's give it a name now too, so we could do a name up here and do string. Let's pass that as well. So this is just going to be called RPG. This one's just going to be called, wait, this one's RPG, and then this one is AP pistol. That, and then we can do name to name, and then blip.scale. Let's just set that to 1. I think will probably be fine. And yeah, that should be it. And then we should have a blip in the server now. Go ahead and zoom in on that. So as you can see here, we have pistol and RPG. So those are blips. Blips are very easy to do, especially on server side. Now let's say that we want to make it so that we can physically see these things, right? So we want to make a marker. So a marker is that like kind of transparent cylinder thing or cone or whatever. So what we need to do is we need to register that on client side for the player to see that. These things can get really complex. I definitely recommend a streamer for this kind of thing, but that's something that you need to look into on your own time. But what I'm going to do here is a very basic implementation of a streamer, okay? And what a streamer is you only want to show things to the player if they are in range of that thing. So here what we're going to be doing is making a very basic streamer for markers, okay? Very, very basic. It is definitely not performant by any means. It just does basic distance checks and so on and so forth. But for our purposes here, for a small game mode, it's perfect. It's exactly what we need. All right, so let's get into how that works. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to create an event that is going to, or a system that'll basically register the marker into a marker system. So over here, we're going to make a new file. We're going to call it like marker.ts, and it's going to be similar to this here. So we're actually going to take this code and kind of just put it over here. And then what we're going to do is register, like, we're going to call this marker. We're going to do export defaults marker. And marker file was initialized. All right, now let's add a position. And we're going to do a color, which is going to be alt.rgba. Or actually, let's just do our own custom one, just to make it super simple. No, RGBA is okay. Alt.rgba. And then we'll do a type, which is going to be a number. Very basic marker. We're going to remove some of this stuff. We're going to do const markers equals, or we're going to set the type to an array of position, alt.ivector3, a color, alt.rgba, and a type, which is going to be a number, just like that. And then we're going to initialize our array like that. All right, so let's add a marker to the server global thing. This is going to be our global register for markers. So I'm going to remove all this, and then we're going to do markers push position, color, and type. But this needs to be an object. Okay. So now this adds a new marker to the markers array here. And our next biggest thing here is that we need a way for when a new player connects to the server, we need to transfer all those markers to the client so that they can start working with them. So what that means is that we need to do like a sync command. Okay. So this is kind of how you do synchronization when players are coming in to the server when there's already pre-established systems that already have things registered. Okay. So this is how you can kind of do that. So what I'm going to do here at the bottom is I'm going to do alt on player connect. And we're going to go ahead and register. Or actually, we don't need to do a player connect here. Let's just keep it to one event, right? And let's call this sync function from our player connect event. So now we can do is we can do marker sync player. And that's going to synchronize our marker instances. So then we go over to marker. And as you can see here, we have nothing in here. And this is where we need to set up our emits to the client. So we can do alt emit client player. And we're going to do, let's call it sync markers. And then we're going to just pass all of the markers in the array down to the client. Okay. Now, as far as when we add a marker, we want to do the same thing, but we don't want to synchronize all markers, if that makes sense. What we want to do instead is we want to just kind of add to the existing marker list. So what we're going to do is just pass the one marker that we're creating here and just pass it on down to the player, just like this. So we do we're going to do emit all client though. So alt emit all clients. Right? Sync markers. Perfect. All right. So what that means is that emit all clients means it's going to go through all of the players and push that information down to them. The alternative to this, if you ever need to loop through a bunch of players at once, you can do alt player all. And you can do like a for each. And that'll let you loop through each player and do something with it, like if p.name equals stuck, do whatever. You know, that's how you do looping through all players. But we don't need to do that here. We have alt emit all client or alt.emit all clients, which is really, really nice. So that being said, let's synchronize this. So if we go over to client side, we have that startup file. Let's go ahead and make a system folder. And let's make a file that matches the one that we have on server side, which is going to be marker.ts. We're going to do import all as alt from alt clients. And then we're going to do import all as alt from alts. Or we're going to do native from natives. There we go. All right, so let's register these events, right? So usually like a good practice though is actually, we have a shared folder? We do not. Let's actually talk about a shared folder real quick because this is something that's super useful and I highly recommend it for managing event systems. So let's say that I need to have something that's shared between the server and the client. It's just like a string representation of something. So rather than me doing copying this here, right, and trying to remember this specific event name, I don't want to remember this event name. I don't care to remember this event name. I don't want to have to come back to this file to remember it all the time. So instead, what we want to do is a shared file. So if I make a folder and call it shared, and then we make a file inside of it, which is going to be called events, right? And then what we can do is we can do export const events, and we're going to register some things. We're going to do to clients. It's going to be one of them. And instead of to client, we're going to do sync markers. We're just going to call it sync. Okay, so that's our event. The only thing is, the client has no idea that this file even exists. So we need to make it recognize that. So on client side, so like on server side, we can access all the TypeScript files. There's no issue with it whatsoever. We can just kind of access whatever. But on client side, it's like, we don't know what this is. We have no idea where this is. So we need to edit the resource configuration and add shared. So that'll add the shared folder to it. And now we can see all of the files inside of shared, and now we can actually reference those client side. Like Alt-V will do all the internal things to make it happen. So now, instead of on server side doing this weird stuff where we have sync markers, we can just do events to client sync markers, right? Which is fantastic. That makes it so that we have this perfect variable, like this one variable that will always be the same. I'll never make any typos. So now we can do that on server side, where we do alt on server events to client sync markers. And now I can make a function to handle that. So let's do function sync markers. Markers, which is going to be an array of something here. Give it a second because I got to define all that. And there we go. So we bound that to that. So now here's an even cooler thing about these shared folders, right? So we have this interesting type here, right, of markers. And now what we can do is define this interface and share it with the client. So instead of writing each individual interface like this in TypeScript, I can take it out and go over to shared, and I'm going to go like and just make a file called interfaces. And I'm going to do export type. And let's just call this marker sync. And there we go. I have it defined there. Now, there is a little bit of a catch here because we need to define these, right? So if I do import all as alt from alt shared, these are already predefined for me. Like those types exist. So now I can go into my server-side interfaces and I can take this one, put it in here, and then I can import it. And there we go. So now I can define it on both sides without actually having to do anything, which is like way better for managing our types and things like that. This is something that JavaScript doesn't necessarily offer as, like type safety and things like that. With TypeScript, we get access to all this wonderful stuff that'll help us kind of manage our repository. It's fantastic. Anyway, let's go over what needs to be done for making markers show up. So markers are something that needs to be done in what is called an every tick, and an every tick runs as often as possible. It's usually based around a game's frames per second, which again may or may not be true. It's usually like a really small amount. Like we're talking 0 milliseconds. Like this thing is going all the time. Like it needs to run all the time. Like you're calling a function every chance it gets. Okay. Now, that being said, let's make this synchronization of the markers happen. So we need to create a markers list. Let's call this existing markers. And we're going to make it an array of marker sync. We're going to initialize it. And what we want to do is when we synchronize markers, all we want to do is take the existing array and basically concat it or combine it and then overwrite itself. Okay, so all it's doing is taking the new stuff and just putting it in there. And that's about it. Yeah, because the reason why that we do that is here we're adding new markers to an existing array. And over here, when we're doing a synchronization of the player, we want them to receive all of the markers. So we should never call sync twice, but we should call add all the time to synchronize new changes to the marker system. Now that being said, what we need to do is set up something to enable the tick system that we need. So we're going to call it draw. Okay. So think of it like we're drawing markers on the screen now. And when they join the server, this function is going to be called to call draw all the time. So if I do an every tick and I call the draw function like that, because it's looking for a callback, is what this is. This is a callback. It's now going to call this all the time. So if existing markers dot length is less than or equal to 0, we're just going to return to keep things slightly performant here. What we want to do as well is check the distance between the player and the marker that we are looking at. So how do we do that? So there's usually built-in functions for each marker type. So I'm going to make a for loop in here. For let's do let marker of existing markers. We're going to do marker and then position, and then all we have access to is X, Y, and Z. So if we actually want to do a comparison between the player and the client, we need to convert it to a client-side vector 3. So we can do that by doing we'll do POS, and then we'll do new alt vector 3 marker X marker.posy marker.pos Z. All right, so now we have an actual position here, and then we can do distance, which is going to be position dot distance to alt player local position. And let's just say that our stream range, we only want to see it if they're within, let's say stream range, I don't know, 50? Sounds pretty good. Quite a lot of distance, actually. So if distance is less than, let's actually make it lower so I don't have to go as far to see this. So let's just make it 5. If distance is less than the stream range, or actually greater than the stream range, we're going to continue. Otherwise, we're going to draw the marker. So we're going to do native raw marker. We're going to give it a type of 1, which is a cylinder. You can actually see some of the types here, but you can dig into it more if you want to. But 1 is a cylinder, and we're going to do marker, or actually, let's just do POSX, POSY, POSZ. Set the direction to 0. We'll set the rotation to 0. We'll set the scale, which is going to be X, Y, and Z. So we usually want to do this based on the range. So let's just make it 3 for the sake of clarity here. And then we have information about color. So we can do marker.color R, marker color G, marker color B, and then marker color alpha. Now alpha is 0 to 255. That's how transparent you want it. So if you want a slightly transparent one, you usually want to set it to 100. Okay. Bob up and down, false. Face camera, false. P19, no effect, default value script is 2, so let's set it to 2. Rotate, let's do false. Texture dictionary, let's just keep it empty for now, like an empty string. Texture name, empty string. Draw on entities, false. Perfect. All right, so let's go ahead and take this code, and we're going to add our first marker. So on the server side, if we go into weapon giver, we have an add function. Let's add that marker. So if we do marker add, let's do position, new alt RGBA. Let's set it to 0, 255, 0. And let's give it an alpha of 100. And type is 1. Speaking of type, looks like we're passing that down, so let's go ahead and fix that so that we have marker.type here. All right. Now, this marker specifically, we don't need to initialize anything. We can if we want to. It's not necessary since we're already referencing it inside of a different file. as well as in the events as well. But if we really want to keep things simple and make sure everything's initialized how it should be, we're going to do marker from systems. We're just going to do marker.init. We could just see that in the console. So let's go ahead and run it and see where we end up here. Boy, that's a lot of talking. Okay, so we have marker file was initialized, weapon giver file was registered. All right, now let's go ahead and head in game. And let's see if we were successful on the markers. It looks like... Doesn't look like we were too successful here, because I think what we forgot is that we did not load this file on client side. So let's go ahead and load that. So let's go ahead and do an import here at the top, and we're going to do import systems marker. And that should resolve it and load the file for us. And go ahead and reconnect here. Boom. And were we successful? Does not look like it. Looks like we have a few errors here. Draw marker, native call. I can't even read that because there's just so much happening. So let's go ahead and close that down real quick. I'm just going to copy a good chunk of it so I can see what the heck I'm looking at. All right, so what do we have? Marker 16, draw marker, native call failed. Exception code. That is not useful at all. We'll click marker.js 16. So if we go in here, we look at 16, which is this. So it has an issue with this, but we're not sure why. So let's go ahead and try and figure out why this native call has failed. So this was usually going to require a little bit of Googling around, as well as checking the Discord and so on and so forth. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and look at my own code. Because I've already done this 1,000 fucking times and I can't always remember what's exactly in here. So we're going to go ahead and look at my marker code. So maybe what I can do here, these actually look like they can be set to undefined. False, false. Okay, let's try this out. So it looks like maybe the empty strings there are not the what we're looking for here. And let's go ahead and reconnect. Maybe we're successful. I'm not sure yet. Oh, there we are. Yep. Okay, we got it. So there we go. We now have it like based on the range or whatever. So the thing with this is that like a range is actually, think of it like the circumference. So you need like the full thing across. So if let's say like your cull shape is 3, that means it's like 3 on each side. Oh wait, maybe I'm mistaken. Hold on. Let me double check here. Yeah, so that looks like it came into play about right there, right? So what we need to do is actually double the scale, right? So this is our scale here. So let's go ahead and add like the scale option to our marker stuff. So let's do scale, and then let's just give it a number. And let's go ahead and go to marker sync. We'll pass scale, which is going to be a number. Go over here. And let's just pass it. It's going to be over here now, so let's do 3. That. And we'll pass scale down like that. And then on client side, let's go ahead and handle that scale as well. So we can do marker.scale. Let's do... Actually, this needs to be like X, Y, and Z. But that's okay. That's okay. We can do it this way as well. So we're just going to make it all the same across the board. Very simple that way, I would say. So now if I walk over here, that's actually where it gives us the weapon, which is this right here. So usually like your cull shape scale, like your marker scale is twice the size of your cull shape scale. That makes sense. So you're usually, when you're specifying a col shape, you start from here to here, and that's like one. That's your basically your 3. That's your 3 distance is that. So then it basically takes the col shape and it's like, hey, I'm gonna double that, and then it goes all the way across like that. So yeah, so keep that in mind. Other than that, I mean, we are seeing it, which is fantastic. And we can increase the stream range if we want, because, you know, it's a little hard to see, to be completely fair. So let's make it 10. So it's only going to render the markers when the player is actually close to them. Otherwise, they can use the blip as reference to see where they need to go, which is much better for handling things like this. So I hope that makes a little bit more sense for handling things like this. So like if I walk through here and I walk away, you can see them disappear. And that's how you do like markers. So markers and rectangles and all that sort of stuff is all done through everythings. Geez, what else? You know, there's so many things that you can do with LV. It's ridiculous. Like, this is just col shapes and markers and some of the basic functionalities to get things from the player when they're doing specific things. Oh my gosh. All right, so let's do another thing. Actually, no, let's not do another thing. I think that's enough for this thing, this specific video. Like, my voice is already tired. I think this is good enough for giving some basic understandings of how to do server to client, client to server, how to do col shapes, how to do markers, how to do blips, how to spawn the player, how to set the player's model, how to change their position, so on and so forth. As far as chat and everything else goes, there's other resources that you can look at. But for now, I think this video is done for the fundamentals. Maybe this is a part 1. There might be a part 2. I don't know. It just depends on if I ever feel like recording again. That being said, I hope this was informational for some of you that were curious about this. But yeah, enjoy this slightly newer tutorial.